Congresswoman, how are you?
Well, if it is a question of whether or not I think that the battle is still afoot, then I'm on the battlefield because there is so much going on in our life and our lives today, Reverend, that it is important to not cease, and I am unceasing. Sometimes you get tired, but what I would say is that only in certain instances do I claim Fannie Lou Hamer and say I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired. And it is in the vein of her message, which was she's not tired, but she's sick and tired of being sick and tired of injustices. And so I would say that we have a moment in history to get all of the pieces together. The momentum of this great nomination, the movement of Black Lives Matter and Black Lives Movement, the combination of over 200 civil rights organizations that have come together to help us under HR 40, the Commission to Study and Develop Reparation Proposals, the families who are demanding justice around Ahmaud Arbery, Brother Brooks, Tamir Rice, who, by the way, has not yet received an investigation by the Justice Department. His incident, his tragic murder, was in 2014. Remind everybody, he was a 12-year-old that had a BB gun, 12-year-old. Of course, Breonna Taylor, that we are grateful for Oprah Winfrey's and other influencers' voices to be heard. Billboards are now all over the city to be able to emphasize that justice has not yet been done. And then, of course, my beloved constituent, who, of course, lived in Ilhan Omar's district, beloved constituent George Floyd, his family grew up in CUNY Homes and Jack Yates High School. Just a few days ago, those who played football with George, Big Floyd, did a marvelous thing, set up a goal of empowerment for young people, getting people out to vote in his name. Of course, he played football and basketball. You know, you never know. I wonder would any of that have mattered to the officer who, with reckless abandonment, intent, and maliciousness, just decided to kill him on that day. So until we render justice and until we continue to have voices that are not mine, meaning they don't come from my heritage, and truly when America rises up to what the founding fathers, although they were imperfect, the language they wrote was perfect language because it said that they have organized to create a more perfect union from what they came from, where they were discriminated against on the basis of religion, and that their rights, even under European rule, their rights were much limited. In fact, discrimination was rampant in Europe. It was a caste system, or it was a system, economic system. You were in or you were out. And they wanted to come to a place where we could have opportunities. So we are still fighting for that. And as a senior member of the Judiciary Committee, Reverend, that is something I constantly do. I'm fighting here in the district. I just want to end by saying, you know, we are still a hot spot in Texas, along with California and Florida. In the last 24 hours, Florida had the most deadliest day. We still are upwards of 20% positive rate here in the state of Texas. California, I think, went to 600,000 cases. We're in the nation approaching 6 million cases and approaching 170,000 dead. I think it's about 168,000. Every time I say that number, chills run up my spine, and primarily because the family of Americans, they said there's probably not one American because of the numbers, and we don't understand the magnitude of these numbers, that can say they've not been impacted by COVID-19 in some way. But just think of the families and extended families of the 168,000. I mean, you can include relatives and immediate family, but you include co-workers and neighbors who this person meant something to. And I don't know how the government, the administration, the White House can even sleep at night when we have this high numbers. And of course, the Congressional Black Caucus, and I participated with that on the Health Task Force to focus on waking the government up about the harsh impact on Black people, on African Americans, and then Latinx, both in terms of infection and in terms of deaths. So we're still working.
Of course, of course. How do you feel about this ticket? How does it feel to have a Black woman finally on a major party ticket?
Well, I've spoken this week, and I think I will say a little bit of how I characterize it this week. First of all, I think people should know the history of Black women. Of course, in this horrific history of ours that we are trying to correct, to establish a new pathway, the traders stopped trading gold and spice to trade slaves. And slaves became the economic engine of this nation and Europe. But in the course of that structure, the woman was the binding force of making a family. Obviously, there was no respect for slave families. There was no respect for us when the Constitution was written. We were not even counted as a person. But if you look at the narratives, you can see slave women holding on to children, holding on to little boys, trying to make sure that they were not separated, taking care of home when they sold the daddy or the husband or the brother or the mainstay of the family or the grandfather or the matriarch, the patriarch rather. That woman became that holder of the burden, the translator of the legacy. I remember one narrative where the slave woman sent a message to her husband, "Don't come, they're selling us. I'm trying to keep them from selling a 13-year-old boy and taking her daughter." I don't know if people know the brutality of slavery, but the woman felt the burden because obviously we are tending to be the glue of a family. We have given birth to these children. They are our family. They're not slaves to us. And so I think what has happened with this unique selection, but certainly not without a basis, meaning Black women have been experienced and competent and ready to do this for centuries, if you will. But in any event, it is an affirmation of Black women counting and Black women's genius and Black women's experience and Black women's burden, because our burden didn't end with slavery. It traveled all the way through in the broken 1887 compromise, the lynching of 4,000, including women, the horrors of Jim Crowism, and the life of discrimination in the 20th century that included economic and social and health and educational, if you will, discrimination. Black women kept families together. Black women sent boys off to war. Black women sent, during mass incarceration, young men off to prison. Black women held families together. Black women became educated. They became astronauts, business women, doctors, professors, boxers, Olympians. Unbelievable. And we have never been president or never been a vice president. Senator Harris, who comes with her own genius, her own expertise, her own oneness, standing with her sister and her family in Oakland, California, integrating schools, being the first district attorney in San Francisco, the first attorney general, happened to be an African-American woman, Southeastern heritage, Southeastern Asian heritage, and someone who had run a statewide race and won, and as well presided over a $700 million budget, 4,800 staff, joined a unity ticket of a man that respects her and says, I want everybody to hear this, Sheila Jackson-Lee didn't say it. Joe Biden said it to his vice presidential pick. I want you to be the last voice in the room, so that her status is no less than the status he had with President Barack Obama, and probably more than the status of many VPs through the ages. So my point that I made earlier this week was that my friend Kamala Harris went to the mountaintop and she took Black women with her. And I believe that we are moving forward for the greater good.
Amen. Isn't it interesting? Don't you find it interesting that, and again, you and I work together every day in the reparations movement. Don't you find it interesting that the detractors within our movement, those who say that the vestiges don't matter and we should only think of those who can prove a direct lineage from slavery in America, are the same people. There's some overlap between them and the people who say Kamala's not really an African-American woman because she's from Jamaica. So don't you find that interesting? And isn't this an opportunity to kill a couple of birds with one stone?
Well, let me just say this. My focus is, of course, on the passage of H.R. 40. In the language of that document, the four corners of that document is an appropriate apology and acknowledgement of the burden of slavery on Black people. And then it goes on to say it was a government action. And so let me say that Senator Harris is a Black American. She is an American born in Oakland, California, and she is the perfect example of the legacy of slavery wherever it might have been. But more importantly, she is an example of someone treated with discrimination because of the color of her skin and because of her being called and categorized in this nation as a Black person, a Black American. And of course, I always say and remind people of her Southeast Asian heritage as she does. But it is important to note that here she has been described and has taken the position that she stands as a Black woman. Who am I to in any way counter that? And so we have a Black woman on the ticket. We look forward to legislation that deals with the treatment of Black people, and we will stand without fear of anyone that even tries to describe and use any words like anchor or non-citizen, and be able to, with legal arguments, profoundly say that she is everything that we had hoped and dreamed for. She is a Black woman proud of her heritage, and I must say, a proud graduate of Howard University. Now you go, girl, and as well, all the HBCUs, I don't want to see one of them skipping past voting, and I want them to bring 10 HBCUers and Thurgood Marshall schools, those are the state Black schools, with them.
Amen.
That's a lot of power.
Amen.